So welcome everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, and thank you for dialing in to today's webinar, where we will be presenting the final version of our application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks in the insurance sector. Very pleased for all of you to join us, and just to introduce myself and the other speakers today, my name is Hanne van Voorden. I'm the Head of Supervisory Practices at the IAS Secretariat. And I'm joined here with the leadership team of the IAS Climate Risk Steering Group. So firstly, we have with us Daniel Wang from Singapore, who is the chair of the steering group. And we also have with us the two vice chairs of the group. We have Jan Marin from France and Grace Arnold from the United States. Together, we will be presenting today to you a little bit of background about the paper, how it is developed, and the main contents. And as usual, we will always also provide for some time for questions and answers towards the end of the session. A few logistical things that I would like to mention before we dive into the actual session. Firstly, in case you have any trouble following the slides that are being shown on the screen, you can also follow them yourself by going to our website and downloading the slide deck there. Simply go to iais.org. To our events page, and there you will be able to find a link to the slides. Also, in case you cannot join the entire session today, or you have maybe interested colleagues who would like to view this as well, we will be recording this, and we will also be publishing this again on our website and YouTube channels later this week. With that, I would like to hand over directly to Daniel, the chair, to start with a bit of background on the IAS work on climate risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So as you can see on the slide before you, allow me to take the next 5 minutes or so, I hope, to share with you on the background to the work here. So the IAS Strategic Plan for 2025 to 2029 focuses on three pivotal themes: climate change, digital innovation, and societal resilience. So for today's meeting, we will touch on the first theme on climate change. So many of us are aware that climate change presents a source of financial risk to insurers and regulators alike. Insurers are exposed to both transition and physical risks through their underwriting and investment activities. Insurers are also uniquely positioned to serve as key agents in identifying, mitigating, and managing climate-related risks, thereby contributing to strengthen societal resilience given the climate change that is all around us. So climate change is a challenge that transcends borders and demands a coordinated response at an international level. Such collective action creates a more level playing field and ensures greater consistency for internationally active insurers, while facilitating the exchange of best practices and guidance among supervisors. So with a broad membership of over 200 jurisdictions, all exposed to climate-related risks, we at the IAS play a crucial role to support our members on their climate journey. So to do so, the IAS published an application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks on 17th of April. The paper provides guidance on how supervisors can take steps to strengthen supervisory expectations and assess climate change readiness. The paper was drafted for varying levels of expertise, as we recognize that those in emerging markets and developing economies, for instance, which have the fewest resources to analyze this risk, are likely to also face the greatest climate-related challenges. You can go to the next slide. At the center of our work on climate-related risks is the need to strengthen our understanding of the type and magnitude of climate-related risks, as we would any other risk, while recognizing that the traditional methods for risk assessment need to be adapted given the nature of climate risks. Next, the IAS's effort on climate change will cut across all IAIS core objectives, including data collection, matrix and analysis, standard setting, sharing of good supervisory practices, facilitating supervisory capacity building, and implementation assessment. So today our updates will focus on our work on supervisory practices. However, it's important to note that the analysis of climate risk is integrated in our annual global monitoring exercise, with results published every year in the IAIS's Global Insurance Market Report. Next. set the scene, the insurance core principles are the globally accepted framework for insurance supervision. As the ICPs are high-level standards and principles-based, changes to the ICPs are made infrequently and only for material issues. We consider the ICPs as quote-unquote supervisory material. Application papers, meanwhile, provide supporting material related to these supervisory material. Application papers do not include new requirements, but provide further advice, illustrations, recommendations, or examples of good practice to supervisors on how supervisory material may be implemented. This will be the focus for our update today. It's important to note that the proportionality principle is built into the ICPs and therefore also applies to the content of all application papers. Next, the IIS has conducted a detailed, deliberative, and transparent approach to developing the application paper on the supervision of climate-related risks. This paper has benefited significantly from the feedback we received from our supervisor members, as well as stakeholders in the industry, whether through formal public consultation, in public discussions at our annual conference or global seminars, as well as in workshops or presentations to the different drafting work streams. The work started in 2022 with a detailed gap analysis of the ICPs to assess how climate-related risk was already captured in existing IAIS materials and to identify areas requiring additional guidance on supervisory practices. On the ICPs, we concluded that given the principles-based nature of the ICPs, that only a limited number of changes needed to be added to reflect the need for climate-related risks to be integrated into supervisory frameworks. This application paper was published in early April, as mentioned, and which we are discussing today, and it follows 4 earlier public consultations which covered different sections of the paper. Taken together, the paper provides a practical guide for supervisors as they look to integrate climate-related risks into their supervisory frameworks and to support insurers on this journey. Together with the final application paper, we also published a number of different documents that set out how the consultation comments were addressed. Hannah will now provide some detail on the responses we received and how they have been addressed.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. And indeed, I will go through these 4 consultations one by one, trying to share a little bit more background on the comments received, but also how we try to address those. I should note also that we have received really a wealth of input through these formal consultations, but also in our many engagements that we've had with supervisors, with the industry, and other experts and interested parties, including through webinars, in-person events, etc. So we really thank you, all of you who have contributed to this. And as per usual IAS practice, we have published all the comments that we have received and also an IAS response to these comments on the IAIS website for each of these 4 consultations. So I will only share a few highlights with you now. As you may recall, the first consultation that we did 2 years ago in March 2023 was a relatively short consultation and was really aimed to set out the IAS work program and propose the scope of the work. We received good support on the proposed direction that we had laid out in that consultation. And this has then also resulted in us including, for instance, a bit more background on issues around governance and risk management in one of the following consultations. In terms of the work on transition planning, there was also some support indicated at the time for the IAS to look into these issues. What we have done here is we have tried to see elements in the paper where we can address this as well, for instance, the link to risk management or scenario analysis. And we have also engaged with the UNDP Sustainable Insurance Forum, who did some work on the topic last year, and they published a summary of that work last year in November. Then later that year, in November, we published the first really more substantive papers, which now form separate chapters in the overall application paper. One was about the role of scenario analysis in trying to help with a forward-looking assessment of climate-related risks, both for supervisors and for the industry. And the other one was more around market conduct-related issues, greenwashing and issues around natural catastrophes. So on scenario analysis, we received some mixed responses, with some respondents asking us to add even more detail to the paper, and others cautioned against being too detailed or possibly being seen as being too prescriptive. So we do hope that the final version strikes the right balance, and we will continue to work on this topic in other areas. We also received several helpful inputs on the specific points that were dealt with in the various papers, and we have been able to address those points by adding sometimes some extra examples or adding some additional content. To the extent there was some concern about prescriptiveness, which we've also seen in some of the other responses, I would like to repeat the fact what Daniel already mentioned just now, that application papers in itself, they do not set new requirements. So if, for instance, maybe as an example, we would use the word should in such a paper, that is really not meant as setting an expectation or a requirement. Instead, it provides more of a recommendation, often also based on good practices that we already see. So good real life practices, for instance, within supervisory authorities or within the industry. And I should also note that throughout the various consultations, we sometimes receive feedback that the IAS should focus more on the opportunity side. So for instance, this was the case on the scenario analysis paper, and that the paper would have too much of a risk focus. I guess here I should say that, of course, given the role of insurance supervisors, our focus naturally is more on risks, but we did add some explanatory acknowledgement in the introduction of the paper to make this clear that, of course, there are also opportunities in these areas. Moving on to the following consultation, which was issued in March. Apart from some text on changes to the ICP guidance, which was already published last year, it included quite a lot of various supporting materials on various topics, which again now also have been integrated in various sections in the paper. We received responses both from the insurance industry, but also from experts, NGOs, and other parties. Again, sometimes there were some mixed responses. So also there we tried to really find the right balance between prescriptiveness, risk, opportunities, and level of detail. We also received quite a lot of valuable suggestions and inputs for possible further work. And that's something that we will cover also in some of our ongoing work of the IAIS. Finally, we published our fourth and final consultation last year in July, where this again focused on quite a substantive topic around supervisory reporting and public disclosures, and then also some text around the role of macroprudential supervisors and supervisory cooperation. So that part was really geared towards the supervisory community, whereas the first part was, of course, relevant both for supervisors and insurers alike. So on reporting and disclosure, we were able to make a few tweaks based on your comments around how the IAS ICPs relate to existing frameworks and what the role is of the IAS and insurance supervisors in this regard. And also we tried to explain even better the different purposes and therefore also different scope of reporting for the supervisor versus reporting for the general public. We will also continue our work on indicators, where there were some questions around the indicators that we included into this paper. I should note that these are really meant for illustrative purposes and were not meant to be a defined set of required indicators. So with that, I would hand back to Daniel to go to the next section of this webinar. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. So I just want to reiterate how grateful the IIS and myself personally for the time and effort that various stakeholders took to respond to the various consultations. So as set out in this slide, there are essentially 5 sections to the application paper. My colleagues, Jan and Grace, will now take you through each of these sections in a little more detail.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Greetings to everyone. So let's go through by ICP by SCP and start with ICP 7. That's the global standard of corporate governance in the insurance sector. So the application paper considers the ICP 7 in the context of climate-related risks and has been looking into the consequences of those risks for governance. Effective corporate governance is key to maintain a stable insurance sector, and I'm sure everyone knows, and we need the insurance sector to be able to meet the needs of policyholders. So four main messages from the application paper. First, given that climate risk is an evolving risk area, the relevant roles of and responsibilities assigned to the board, senior management, and control functions should continue to adapt along the way. Second, there should be an appropriate understanding of and an opportunity to discuss regularly climate related risks at the board and board committee levels. Third, insurers should incorporate and assess climate related risks as part of their annual financial planning, as well as the long and short term strategic planning processes. Insurers should also ensure that the impact of climate change is well represented in existing risk categories. And fourth, the board should have a role in maintaining effective oversight of climate-related risk management, including incorporating climate-related considerations into the insurer's risk appetite, strategies, and business plans. So effective corporate governance and risk management and internal controls are essential complements on ICP 8 related to risk management and internal controls. This is setting out requirements on systems of risk management and internal controls, including the control functions. Three key messages in the application paper. First, when addressing climate-related risks, insurers should integrate this risk into the overall corporate governance framework, including their risk management and internal controls. Second, in performing their duties, control functions should properly consider the impact of climate-related risks on the existing risk categories and have the appropriate resources and expertise to support that analysis. And third, in order to identify, monitor, assess, and manage climate-related risks, as well as with their interactions with other identified risks, the insurer should develop the tools they need to collect reliable quantitative and qualitative data. Then we have the ICP 16. This one is setting out the need for insurers to have an enterprise risk management framework for solvency purposes to identify, measure, report, and manage their risks in an ongoing and integrated manner. In December 2024, the IAIS adopted limited change to ICP 16 to incorporate climate-related risks into the guidance in the ICP. And this was supplemented by a section in the application paper, which is giving four main elements. The first one is that insurers should consider the potential impact and materiality of climate-related risks when assessing the existing risk categories. The second is when material supervisors should expect insurers to identify the relevant climate-related risks inherent to their business portfolios, assess the implication of their underwriting strategy, and develop policies and procedures to integrate the management of these risks within their risk management framework. Insurers' risks appetite statement should similarly reflect these risks. Then, additionally, insurers should consider including in their risk policy a description of how they monitor and manage material climate-related risks in line with their risk appetite statement. And fourth, supervisors should expect insurers to consider all material risk, physical and transition risks arising from climate change in their ORSA, in their own risk and solvency assessment process. and adopt the appropriate risk management actions to mitigate the identified risks accordingly. In the ICP 14, that's standards and guidance for asset and liability valuation. More specifically, the ICP 14.3 requires that the valuation of assets and liabilities is undertaken in a reliable, decision useful, and transparent manner. The valuation section in the paper sets out the need for insurers to consider climate-related risk drivers in both asset valuations and when estimating the value of liabilities. These risk drivers have the potential to impact valuations of the assets and liabilities of insurers. And in turn, supervisors should review insurers' valuation methodologies to determine whether known and reliably estimable information, including the impact of climate risk on their investments, have been considered, and they should review the sources of information used by insurers in their valuation. In the ICP 15, so that's the regulatory investment requirements for solvency purposes for insurers to make appropriate investment, taking into account the risks they face. In December 2024, the IAIS adopted limited change also to the ICP 15 to incorporate climate-related risks into the standard. And the application paper is building on these changes to set out a number of good practices. The first one would be when establishing regulatory investment requirements on the investment activities of the insurer, the supervisors may consider the potential impact of climate change on the insurer's investments. Then it is important that insurers invest in assets in such a way that their portfolio as a whole considers the impact of their investments on the climate. That's the outward perspective, let's say. And it is also important that insurers consider their policyholders' preferences in relation to climate change considerations where and when relevant. Finally, insurers should consider climate-related risks as part of their asset liability management, especially when liabilities have a long duration. Then, Anna already mentioned it, but there is this part about the public disclosures and supervisory reporting in ICP 9 and ICP 20. So they can be particularly challenging given the nature of climate-related risk and the fact that it's affecting a number of dimensions of the insurance activities. Yet, as the risks from climate change is increasing, it becomes increasingly important also to for insurers to effectively disclose the material climate-related risk to investors and policyholders, and for supervisors to integrate this risk into supervisory reporting requirements. So consistent with the ICP 9 on supervisory review and reporting, the application paper considers the need for insurers to integrate these risks into the overall corporate governance framework, including their risk management and internal controls. In performing their duties, control functions should properly consider the impact of climate-related risks on the existing risk categories and have the appropriate resources and expertise to support their analysis. Insurers should develop tools to collect reliable quantitative and qualitative data to identify, monitor, assess, and manage climate-related risks, as well as their interactions with other identified risks. Public disclosures are equally as important. Of course, supervisors should require that climate-related risks are effectively captured in public disclosure requirements where material. The application paper set out the need to consider issues of connectivity between financial statements and climate disclosures, the need for appropriate indicators or metrics that are relevant and meaningful for market participants and policyholders. Supervisors should consider revising expectations or providing guidance to clarify how material climate-related risks exposures should be disclosed to meet the ICP 20 requirements as with any other material risk. So now I'll hand the floor to Grace to update on the other section on the paper.
Thank you, Jan. And great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. Given the complex nature of climate change, historical trends of climate risk drivers will not reliably predict their future trajectories. And so it's important to assess the potential impact through scenario analysis and stress testing. This section of the application paper on scenario analysis considers the practical steps that insurance supervisors can take to build frameworks which provide a better understanding of climate risk. This section considers the role of scenario analysis and what it can play in meeting the requirements set out in ICP 16 on enterprise risk management for solvency purposes and ICP 24 on macroprudential supervision. The IAS will continue to provide a platform for supervisors to share their experiences on scenario analysis so we can learn from each other. ICP 25 sets out a standard on supervisory cooperation and coordination. The paper highlights that when defining climate-related data collection requests that affect insurance groups active in multiple jurisdictions, supervisors should consider coordinating with other involved supervisors and regional or global insurance standard setters. ICP 24 sets out standards for supervisors to identify, monitor, and analyze market and financial developments and other environmental factors that may impact insurers and the insurance sector. Use this information to identify vulnerabilities and address, where necessary, the buildup and transmission of systemic risk at the individual insurer and at the sector-wide level. This section of the paper sets out the importance of regular and systematic collection of climate-related data, the importance of analyzing climate data, and the benefits of flexibility in these regimes. As well as macroprudential or prudential considerations, conduct of business supervisory frameworks should reflect climate-related risks. An increase in consumer appetite for products with sustainability features, both in life and in non-life business, has been observed in some jurisdictions. To meet this increase in demand, insurers and intermediaries may adapt their offers to propose products with sustainability features and to portray themselves as having sustainability features within their company. Insurers arise when these representations are misleading, which can be considered greenwashing. Supervisors should therefore consider tools for ensuring that insurers or intermediaries that claim to be sustainable do so honestly, both before entering into a contract and through to the point at which all obligations under the contract have been satisfied, in line with ICP 19 on conduct of business. Likewise, in addition to concerns about increasing protection gaps that will emerge with climate change, there are also concerns that existing conduct of business risks might not be managed sufficiently by insurers and intermediaries to ensure customers are treated fairly. This section explores how ICP 19 on conduct of business applies to products offering Nat Cat protection in particular, and how supervisors should identify, monitor, and address possible market conduct risks associated with these products. Nat Cat coverage and exclusions should be presented and formulated in a clear and comprehensive manner. Supervisors should require that pricing is adequate, non-discriminatory, and properly communicated to consumers. Insurers should examine their claims handling operations. So finally, the paper makes clear that to mitigate the risk of greenwashing leading to severe misconduct or even fraud, supervisors should remain mindful that the general reach and provisions of ICP 21 and the fraud frameworks within their own jurisdictions. When relevant, supervisors should appropriately apply fraud-related enforcement actions in line with their jurisdiction's laws. And with that, I will hand it back to Daniel.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Jan. So to the audience out there, you can imagine how much effort has gone into this, and we hope that you can see that it's quite a comprehensive set of examples and illustrations as well as guidance here. So this is, I think, one of the longer application papers that IAIS has produced. But in summary, the publication of the application paper marks the IAIS's pivot from policy development now to implementation. So we have going to focus on supporting our members in effectively integrating climate-related risks into their supervisory frameworks henceforth. So I sincerely hope that this set of practical guidance can support our supervisor members while maintaining the necessary flexibility across different markets and jurisdictions. As climate-related risks will continue to evolve, we all must remain relevant and tailor our supervisory responses to changing circumstances. So our work here at the CRSG and at the IAIS on climate-related risks will undoubtedly continue. As set out in the IAIS's roadmap, this year we will do a few things. Continue to assess climate-related risks through the GME data collection, and explore climate matrix for supervisory reporting and public disclosures. We also analyze the extent to which climate risks are integrated into NetCat models, and also to facilitate structured knowledge sharing sessions among members and relevant expertise to promote understanding of supervisory good practices for climate-related risks. We will continue to collaborate with our partners. Hannah named quite a few just now, to deepen the support for IAIS members, particularly those in emerging markets and developing economies. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. I'll pass over to Hannah now to help guide the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for the great explanations and background. So let me just introduce how we would like to run the Q&A. So there are two ways to ask your question. One way is you could enter your question in the chat by simply typing your question. If relevant, you can mention for who the question is. Otherwise, we will pick it up as a team. Otherwise, it's also possible to that we unmute yourself and you can actually ask your question while speaking. So in that case, we kindly ask you to raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, and then we will make sure to unmute you and you can ask your question. At this stage, I would just wait for a brief moment as people consider if they want to ask any questions.
We have a hand up, Hannah from Dave Snyder. Try.
Yes, and I also see a question coming in the chat. So let me maybe raise that one first, which I think was maybe only sent to myself. So I'll just read it out loud. So there's a question on the relationship of how to address climate-related risks in terms of if it's a cross-cutting risk that is supposed to be integrated in risk management frameworks, or if it's should be seen as a standalone risk and dealt with separately. I do think we have some language on that also in the paper. I'm not sure if maybe Daniel, you want to give a first go in responding to that, and maybe Jan as well.
Yes. Here at the IAIS, we don't see climate-related risk as a standalone or supreme risk over all other risks. So it should be treated no differently from the various risks that face an insurer in conducting its business. But nonetheless, because climate change continues to evolve, and it's in a way also slightly quite different from the risk where, because of the long time horizon and because it's also a global phenomenon, that's why we have taken the last 2-3 years to consult widely and put together this application paper, where we feel that there are supervisors across the globe which will benefit from upskilling their knowledge in terms of climate risk management practices, as well as supervisory practices relating to the management of climate risk. So I think that's the effort here.
Thank you, Daniel.
I
And
don't
Jan?
think I have anything to add, actually. This is Daniel's answer has been comprehensive. Yes, climate risks are indeed impacting the traditional risks in some ways. The main difficulty that we have with climate risks is that they cannot be assessed by traditional methodologies because we don't have the data for future developments. Therefore, we have to rely on scenario analysis and to use projections. And this is the specific aspect of it and needed to be assessed against the ICPs, and that's what has been done.
Thank you, Jan. And in the meantime, I see quite a number of questions coming in the chat, but maybe I'll first allow David Snyder to come in. And I think, David, you have been unmuted now, so maybe you can try and speak. I personally do not hear anything.
No, I don't either, Hannah, and he has been unmuted.
I think I don't see this little icon that you normally see in terms of your audio connection. So David, if you can hear me, maybe you want to check your audio connection and we'll come back to you shortly. And otherwise, you can use the chat as well. In the meantime, let's just scroll through the questions. I want to make sure I do not skip over them. There was a few questions actually from Elizabeth Jacobs. One of them, the first one, is on how this work relates to the IAS review of the holistic framework. And then she has two other questions as well. I can actually take the first question, maybe also for the benefit of the rest of the audience who may not be aware of the holistic framework. She's referring here to the IAS framework for macroprudential assessment and supervision. We call that the holistic framework for the assessment and mitigation of systemic risk. It's something that we've developed back in 2019, and it feeds into the work of the Financial Stability Board, or FSB, as they assess and address systemic risk more globally across different financial sectors. And the IAS input is one of those inputs. And as he rightly notes, there is a review upcoming this year where the IAS reflects on the progress made and the implementation of that framework in its ability for the IAS to assess risks globally and also to then address those risks either in supervisory practices or standards and other means. So in a sense, it is somewhat related because the IAS has already since 21 we have incorporated climate risk indicators into our annual exercise for assessing global risks. So we have incorporated several indicators asking data from both supervisors and insurers. And we also do that for other emerging risks. So in that sense, it's so far our experience has been really good that it helps us, it gives us a flexible tool to incrementally increase the type of information that we ask about these type of risks, which in some cases, there are maybe not yet quantitative information available, but then at least we are asking for qualitative information from supervisors as well. But the core of that review is not related on climate risk, but it is indeed one of the ways in which we analyze those trends. Then there's a second part of your question, which is more related to disclosure. So I guess Jan, who has led that work, may be able to answer that. So the question is, does the disclosure guidance incorporate ISSB related reporting?
Yes, so the related to the question, no, the disclosure guidance does not incorporate ISSB related reporting as such. Nonetheless, we consider that the ISSB has developed a global baseline that could provide a good basis for a framework consistent with the ICP20. And we have been discussing a lot with the ISSB in a very constructive way. It's a relationship that has been going on for several years, and we will continue our work with them. But it's a collaboration, and the IIS does not endorse one specific model for disclosure frameworks.
Thank you, Jan. And is there anything we would like to share on practical examples of macroprudential related tools that are already being used by supervisors? Is there anything from your jurisdiction or otherwise that Daniel, Jan, or Grace you would like to share?
So I couldn't really quite see the third part of the question, but if you are saying that are there climate related surveillance type tools used at the industry level, I would say that you can please refer to the scenario analysis chapter of the application paper. So this is increasingly being widely used, and also as part of a link to climate risk stress testing. So and then from there, it helps the supervisor to get a sense of, say, the major insurers in their jurisdiction, or at the industry level, the exposures to stress tests, to climate-related risks, as well as over different types of scenarios and parameters. So that is clearly something that is increasingly being done, and I believe some of the insurance supervisors have already published their work and even published round 2 of their assessments by now.
The only thing I'll add to that is that in the US, we have within our system have a catastrophic modeling center of excellence. And so that's been, across the states, we all have different risks, but that's been a way to have coordinated conversations to kind of define what some of the scenarios are, as Daniel was saying. And then we have kind of standards within our financial supervisory work that incorporates climate risk into the climate supervisory work that we're each doing as individual jurisdictions. And so we have kind of a couple ways that we've introduced some ability to have conversations about tools and scenarios, but also some standards within our sort of core financial supervisory work.
Well, from Europe, maybe I can add that indeed we are working on stress testing. The ECPR in particular in France has done two sets of stress testing related to insurance companies, one in 2020, one this year. It has been published recently. These are the main elements that have been implemented so far, but we are still thinking about other types of tools that could be used at the micro and at the macro level, but for now they have not been implemented.
Yes, and I would also add that the paper itself in the sectional scenario analysis provides further examples as well on scenario analysis as a macroprudential tool, and also as a macro tool for insurers themselves. Thank you. So moving on to the next one, question from Anne Veit. What would you say are the biggest differences in comparison to the application paper that the IIS published in 2021? Again, I would be happy to provide a brief answer to that. I think the biggest difference is the scope of topics that are addressed. So back in 2021, we deliberately chose a relatively narrow focus of the paper and only covered a number of insurance core principles or a number of topics relevant for supervisors and insurers in terms of addressing climate-related risks. And this time around, we really tried to be as comprehensive as possible. That's why admittedly, it has become quite a lengthy paper, but hopefully also structured in such a way that you can tease out the elements that are most relevant for you. And in a sense, in terms of topics that were already covered in the 2021 paper and are still covered in this paper, what we did in all those cases is we took the language from 2021 And we reflected some updates based on new experience and examples, or we added in some certain cases more details. But it is consistent with what we also produced in 2021. Then there is a question from Genevieve Walker, whether the IAS will discuss what minimum climate risk models should be used and how tipping points should be considered and their implications on the climate. So I think this question relates both to the role of scenario analysis, but also to the role of modeling by insurers in terms of forward-looking modeling. So we are doing some work on that this year, as Daniel already mentioned. And I'm not sure if Daniel or Jan, you would like to add on top of that in terms of any IAS work in the future.
So maybe I can add on. So just to reiterate, right, the IIS has produced this application paper, which I already mentioned. It's a set of guidance and set of good practices and examples. So I don't think the IIS will at any point will be prescribing a particular model or endorsing some climate risk models over others. So I think that's the first point. The second is the climate risk models. Quite a few are adapted from current net cat models and extrapolated across a longer time horizon. So this also means that there'll be inbuilt assumptions and other things that may affect the accuracy of the model. So I think this remains very much a work in progress globally, and the ones that really do it well are currently very much proprietary in nature, specific to a vendor or a particular insurer or reinsurer. So I think much more work remains to be done in this space. So it's also a bit too early to prescribe anything, even if the IIS had wanted to.
Yeah, nothing to add on my side except that tipping points are not easy to actually model. So it's actually not used so far in macro modeling, and this is one development that we would like to see in the future, but it's still, as we mentioned several times, an evolving area, and more innovations and work on methodologies will be implemented in the future.
Thank you, Jan. And I'll just maybe briefly turn to Dave Snyder's question here, because the audio didn't seem to work. I do hope you can hear us okay, though. So he was asking if there will be additional opportunity to discuss the paper, perhaps a round table. So at the moment, we don't have any in-person roundtable or virtual roundtables planned. Like today's session is really meant to discuss the paper and go through various questions that you may have. Of course, as you know, the IAS does have several other engagements throughout the year. We have our virtual engagement always in July, the global seminar. And then our main in-person event is always towards the end of the year, this year in the second week of November. And I'm pretty certain that issues around climate risk and issues covered in this paper will also be discussed in those venues. But as you will also understand, the agendas for those sessions have not been set yet, because it's still quite far away in the future. But if there are particular topics or issues of interest, then we're always keen to hear that, and then we can take that on board as we plan our engagement for the rest of the year. Then let me move on to the next question, which was from Winnow Delandro Robinson. There was a question on, I think, the link to scenario analysis and availability of data. So are there specific scenario tests or scenario analyses that you can recommend in light of the lack of data for climate-related risks? I think, Jan, we covered that in the paper as well, right? So the extent to which supervisors or insurers can maybe work with proxies or do qualitative assessments in cases where there is no data available. So we do cover that in the paper, but is there anything you would like to add to that?
Well, first that we don't recommend it any specific scenario tests for sure. And as for the lack of data, first depends what we are mentioning. I mean, a lot of data is actually available. The problem is more that we have difficulties in assessing what is to come. So it's more related to scenario analysis. What kind of scenarios do you take into account for your risk management frameworks in particular? And what kind of indicators or metrics you would like to use. This is not an easy question, as always, when it comes to predicting the future. There is a number of scenarios that are available at the international level to help with that process. You know, the International Energy Agency ones and also the ones from the NGFS. So those are widely used already by the financial sector and can be used, but the AIIS as itself will continue working on metrics and try to provide more guidance in this field in the future.
Hannah, if I could, there are a couple of within the US, a couple of states that have public models that are specific to certain kinds of risks. So Florida has a one for hurricanes that's part of their public insurance scheme that they have because they have big hurricane risks. And California is is in the process of doing something similar for wildfire risk because that's been so devastating recently. So I think there are, in addition to the kind of more global and macro scenarios that Jan was mentioning, there are starting to be more specific and public like catastrophe modeling that are specific to the insurance industry as well. And I would expect that will continue.
Daniel, I see you nodding. Do you want to add anything there, or?
I was going to say similar things as what Jan and Grace has highlighted. In a way, the question, if I understood it correctly, actually is the reverse, right? Precisely because in cases where there may be data paucity, all the more scenario analysis is going to be useful. And then there are international, in a way broadly endorsed and widely used scenarios that are already out there in the public domain, which you can consider referencing, and certainly, if anything, also consider how you can customize to your local country or jurisdiction. So I think and I agree with Jan, increasingly it will become a case of which data to use as opposed to having to hunt down data that is not quite there.
It does look like the topic of scenario analysis is really popular amongst our audience because I see at least one more question on this one, which is, I think maybe it relates to what Grace was mentioning as well. It's around, really making these scenario analyses practical in terms of often climate change related scenarios have very long-term horizons. You're talking about decades in the future. But how can you really make it practical and looking at short-term risks, especially, for instance, when the insurance company itself also has a short liability duration. So I assume this question came from someone in the non-life industry. I think we already tried to give some examples in terms of how scenario analysis can be really applied in practice with actual maybe local trends and inputs as well. So I think we've dealt with that question already, but if not,
I can add to that also,
yes.
Hannah. So if you're talking about say for non-life insurers who have shorter investment horizons and assets on their books compared to a life insurer, for instance, then it's a fair point. But certainly on the underwriting side, a non-life insurer will have to be extremely conscious of climate change and the impact on physical risk and natural catastrophes. So this application paper is going to remain useful to you as well, including on the scenario analysis chapters, but certainly on the other risks that we also highlight in the this very comprehensive paper.
Thank you. Then there was a question on the support, the follow-up work that the IS will do, and the support for our members who are from emerging markets and developing economies. Daniel, you touched upon that a little bit at the end of your presentation. I will just read the slide. I think the question was sent to everybody, so everybody has been able to read it already, but I'll read it out once more. For financial institutions active in developed economies, the big question is how we can manage to enhance capital mobilization to EMDEs. What, from the IS perspective, would be the risks that institutional investors, including insurers, should manage when they invest in EMDEs? I don't think this was necessarily explicitly covered in the paper, but in case there's anything either of you would like to add on this, I assume this is in relation to climate-related risks, of course.
Yes, I was going to clarify that because it did not seem like a climate risk question per se, but in the area of climate risk, I already mentioned in my remarks that actually EMDEs will have a lot, in some cases, to upskill themselves, but also because they have faced the greatest threats and risks and exposures to climate change and its related risks. So I think EMDEs has been and will continue to be a very big focus for the IIS. I'm not sure how many of you in the audience are aware, but about a year and a half ago, when we embarked on we did a series of engagements on scenario analysis to different regions, different regional supervisors, and we had a dedicated one just for EMDE supervisors, but also covering the various regions in Europe, Asia, and so on. So I think, given the interest in scenario analysis in that part of the world, in the coming year or two, certainly I hope that there will be more engagements with select groups of EMDE supervisors who are keen to learn more about climate risk management and the role that scenario analysis can play to help them in their domestic jurisdiction. So this is something that we'll be quite keen to support in the coming years.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Then there is another question on the impact of climate change can often be regional and local. And it touches on the topic that we also discussed in the paper, which is the importance of collaboration among supervisors, which is, of course, the very nature of why the IAIS exists. It refers to ICP 24, which is about supervisory cooperation. I guess the open question is, do you think there should be more emphasis on this requirement, i.e. on the requirement for supervisors to coordinate amongst themselves? That one is a little bit tricky for me to answer, so maybe I'll just ask Grace, Jan, and Daniel yourself, because how much are you already able to coordinate with other supervisors globally? Do you think there should be more, or are there already sufficient tools for you through supervisory colleges, I guess the IIS forum and other regional forums as well to engage amongst one another and share experiences?
Yes, so I mean, is there a need for greater collaboration for this problem or challenge relating the global commons that is called climate change? Of course, an emphatic yes to this. I mean, Grace comes from a United States, and there's a lot of collective action on say physical risk and natural catastrophes. Jan is from Europe, and you can imagine that there are many EU supervisors who are working collectively to solve this. On the Asia side, from where I come from, I just came back from a conference in China, right? And presented about this application paper and climate change. And the Chinese supervisors and those from other countries in Asia who attended this conference are also very keen to work together to better understand what's a good way forward to upskill and upscale climate-related practices in their domestic jurisdictions. And in terms of forums where we can discuss this, Hannah already highlighted quite a few, and I don't think we need to add more because there are many supervisory or industry conferences that relate to climate change and climate-related risks. I think the main thing is that coordinated action and greater sharing of practices is the key, and it will continue to remain key for the next certainly the next few years. And it's not just within the insurance sector, but between other parts of the financial sector and eventually connecting with the broader real economy. So I think this remains something to watch for and continue to support for in the coming years.
Do you want me to add a word? Just maybe to say that it's not necessarily regional by nature. There is one component of climate effects that are different from types of countries. Like, for example, small islands have similar are facing similar challenges wherever they are on the globe. And so it's not necessarily always the region that is a relevant level, but more the associations of countries, depending on the risks that they are facing specifically. If they have forests, if they are in a place where heating is higher than globally, there are collaborations that should be fostered. Also, not necessarily thinking about the traditional regions, but more about how we can learn together from one another when we are faced with similar effects.
And I think the thing that I'll just add is in addition to what Daniel said about there being a lot of spaces where there are spaces to talk about climate, there are also a lot of financial conferences, and the financial supervisors who are thinking about this, and it's much more an agenda topic on, I would say, the previous just core supervisory that's not like a very eloquent way of saying it, but the sort of just looking at the numbers kind of financial side, which increasingly now, because there is climate risk is one of the many risks that that insurers are looking at, and supervisors as well. I think it's increasingly a topic on not just climate focused work, but as a whole, as a core part of the risks that we're looking at as financial supervisors.
Yes, thanks everyone. And it's great to see the questions just keep coming in. So I'll just continue with the questions as we go. And the next one I have is a question about looking forward and the interest on climate-related work and the ability of the IS to continue to focus on this area. So the person asking this question refers to some things in the media around perhaps a reduced appetite to work on climate-related risks in the United States, and whether or not this would in any way impact the IS and also the industry in its ability to continue to assess climate-related risks in the future. So I think, as we mentioned already in Daniel's presentation at the end, there is ongoing work from the IAS on climate-related risks, so we continue to work on these topics. But perhaps one of you would like to share a little bit more on that as well.
I'm happy to at least talk about the US. So I think it's important to know a little bit about how the insurance supervisory system works in the states, which is that each state has authority over the insurance markets within their state. And so the federal government has some macroprudential kind of entities and has pulled out of a number of those. The insurance supervisory work happens at the state level, and we have an organization that works on that. We have had climate as a key focus for going on 10 years now, and have and will continue to do that through a variety of activities. And I'm happy to, I can put a few links in the chat for anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more. But I do think that that is not a widely understood way of the way that the US system works, and so is helpful in understanding kind of at the insurance supervisory level how we're thinking about climate risk.
Thank you, Grace. That's helpful, and indeed, maybe you can add something in the chat for further reading. Continue to browse through the questions. There is again another question on further engagement, in this case around the engagement with the ISSB and further work on implementing disclosure for climate-related risks. I think, Jan, you may have touched on this point already, where you said that the IAS will continue to engage with ISSB and other partners, and we're also going to do some work this year around identifying which metrics are already being used. So yes, we do plan to do further work on that, and we will be in touch with relevant parties as we develop that work. I'll leave it at that, unless Jan, you want to add anything there.
It's good.
Then there is a question also on terminology and on the scope of the paper. So perhaps that is something that we should also clarify. So there was a question raised around to what extent the paper and the issues discussed in the paper apply also to reinsurers, or if it is only relevant for the primary insurance market. So perhaps that's something we could have clarified in the beginning as well, so apologies for not doing so. But in the IAS terminology, when we use the word insurance company or insurer, we mean to refer to both insurers, primary insurers, and reinsurers. And in some cases where relevant, we would really make it explicit and we would talk about the reinsurers and their specific roles. But as a whole, the whole paper applies to all types of insurance companies, so life and non-life, primary insurance, reinsurance, groups, large multi-country groups, but also smaller entities active only in one market. So it really is meant to capture all types of insurers. Then, if I'm not mistaken, there are two final questions. One is actually perhaps more related to our work on protection gaps. There's a question on the importance of building climate resilience and whether the IAS or someone else, I guess, may be developing some kind of measurement for climate resilience. For instance, how existing infrastructure is resilient, questions about building codes, etc. Maybe what I can do is again drop a link in the chat there for our work on natural catastrophe protection gaps, because that's a slightly different area of work within the IAS, where we look also with other partners, including the World Bank and the OECD, and we look at these topics because this is not something where, of course, insurance supervisors are, of course, not directly involved in things like this, but insurance supervisors do also play a role in, for instance, incentivizing risk reduction measures and other ways. So perhaps what I will do is I will just drop a little note in the chat for some further reference material. And I don't know if Daniel, you want to add anything on that as well?
No, not much to add. I myself have not really seen very strong demand for what is mentioned in the chat, but I'll defer to others here.
Yeah, I would concur. There is no need for standardized approach on this. I think it's relevant analysis depending on the portfolios of insurance companies and what kind of companies they are insuring, also what policy they have. So it's more specific to each insurers than it would be for an entire sector. And it will also be very dependent on the ministries of environment, the macro strategies implemented by governments and things like that. So it's difficult to actually have one measurement or one indicator that would be widely used at the global level.
Thank you, Jan. And I think that we may have reached the end of this Q&A, because I only see one final question. And again, it's a terminology question. So it's around the outward perspective, which we refer to in our paper, and what we really mean with that, and how that relates to the topic of double materiality. I would maybe remind everybody that I think this question is related to ICP 15. So if you look at the executive summary of the paper, we talk about the outward perspective in a sense of insurers' investments, and that they also look at the way that their portfolio as a whole considers the impact of their investments on the climate. And then we say outward perspective between brackets. So perhaps, Jan, you can clarify a little bit on what we've meant with that statement. And I think indeed there's also a question around the NAIC climate risk disclosure, which indeed we cite as one of the examples of good practice of how disclosures can be organized in a specific country. But Jan, over to you maybe.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to mention that indeed we have been discussing double materiality, but we don't really reference this concept, as it doesn't seem to be highly relevant in the context of the IAIS. So in relation to disclosures, what's important is actually the information needs of users. So it can be policyholders, it can be investors, depending on the situation, or market participants in more generally. In ICP 20, we are referring to the ones that are making decisions on providing resources to and insurance risks and the insurers. So all the information that insurers need to provide should be meaningful, useful, relevant, comprehensive, all that we need for understanding and having a clear view on the business activities, on the risk performance, on the financial position of any given insurer. I think we do caution against excessive publications also, because when you have a volume of information, it can actually be detrimental for the good understanding of the risk situation. So we should indeed focus on material information and provide elements that are indeed useful. There is always this risks to drown useful information in a pile of data that is not that relevant. This is something that we should avoid, and the ICP 20 is actually providing some guidance in this regard. regarding the materiality assessment itself, it really depends on the purpose and the reporting of the reporting entity, and whether they need to speak to a wider audience, maybe. So having elements of outward information can be useful in some cases, and then it's compliant with the ICP 20, but we do not engage further on that road.
Oh, maybe just on the climate resilience survey in the States, I think the question was specifically about it being a model for flexibility, and I think for jurisdictions that need more flexibility, or for a variety of reasons. So I'll give the example. So I'm the insurance commissioner in Minnesota, which is in the middle of the country bordering Canada. We have under our supervision everything from these companies that were from farmers banded together and have existed for over 150 years and serve very small populations of mostly farm communities, all the way up to Allianz under our supervision. And we need flexibility within our own state to be able to figure out, okay, what do we really need? I think to Jan's point, like, we need certain kinds of information for each of those two companies, if you take those as our extremes. And that allows us to be flexible within our jurisdiction to, ask the kinds of questions or require reporting on certain things that are most relevant, but also allows for flexibility across the entirety of the U.S., where each jurisdiction within the U.S. is in a similar position, so that we're getting the right kind of information. To Jan's point, we should have the right kind of information, but we're not asking companies to provide a bunch of information that may not be relevant to their particular sector or their company. But then also we're getting sufficient information to really be able to assess risk within our area, within our jurisdiction, and then have conversations with others throughout the states to make sure that we're taking a more macro lens to it. And I'm sure if you have additional questions, there are a number of folks we can point you to who can talk more about the climate survey.
Great, thank you. So I think that's it for today. I do thank everybody for your active engagement, albeit a little impersonal to the chat, but I do hope that you really valued us taking the time to try to respond to all your questions. Maybe at the end, I would like to thank Daniel, Grace, and Jan for, of course, your leadership over the past years, but also for taking the time today to present the paper. Very much appreciated. Over to you, Daniel, for maybe some final remarks before we close the session.
Thanks everyone to take the time to join us in the webinar. So I want to echo Hannah and say that, certainly thank you for your participation and certainly your feedback over the last 2 years and 4 sets of public consultations as well. Certainly you and your colleagues who were involved in giving us this valuable feedback. Just really want to thank everyone here. For the IAIS, the release of this climate risk application paper really marks a key milestone in our journey. But as with all milestones, it's just the first of many to come, I hope, because as I already mentioned, climate risk is evolving. Hopefully you get better, but at the current rate, it's not getting better, climate change. So I think, this is very much an iterative process, and we will certainly look to, when necessary, update this application paper in the years to come if things change. But frankly, for me right now, and I think for Jan and Grace and my colleagues at the Climate Risk Steering Group at the IAIS, with the release of this application paper, the focus right now should be on implementation, getting insurance supervisors imbibe and onboard some of these practices if it's not already in their domestic supervisory expectations, and so that we can all learn from each other. And as a key theme from even your questions today is really about capacity building. as we uplift and upskill all parties in order to get on board with some of these good supervisory practices relating to climate risk. So I hope we can all of you here in the audience can join all of us here at the IIS in this journey. Thank you very much. With that, I think have a good evening, at least on my side of the world, and have a good day to all of you.
Yes, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.